Okay, everyone, let me paint you a picture. This is a story about the vast, silent world beneath the waves, about the kind of solitude some folks crave, and about an encounter so profound it could change a man down to his very core. Our story begins with Ethan Miller. Think of a man in his late 40s, maybe early 50s, with the kind of quiet intensity you find in people who spend a lot of time alone with their thoughts. His face was weathered, not by harshness, but by sun and sea, etched with the fine lines of countless hours spent squinting into the ocean's glare. Ethan was a diver, a truly seasoned professional, not the daredevil type, but more like an underwater scholar, an artist. His chosen escape this year was the sun-drenched tranquility of the Florida Keys, a world away from his quiet, almost monastic existence in a small town in Maine, where the winters were long and the social calendar decidedly sparse. He'd found a secluded rental, a little bungalow tucked away on one of the less trafficked islands near Marathon, where the loudest symphony was the gentle percussion of waves on sand and the rustling of palm fronds. Each morning, before the sun climbed too high and the tourist boats churned the waters, Ethan would take his chartered vessel, a sturdy little craft named the Salty Dog, skippered by a laconic, sun-baked local named Captain Joe, out to the reefs. He wasn't there to spear fish or hunt for treasure. Ethan was a photographer, a videographer of the deep. His joy was in capturing the ephemeral beauty of the coral gardens, the electric flash of a queen angelfish, the slow, deliberate ballet of a sea turtle, the intricate fractal patterns of a brain coral. He'd spend hours suspended in that silent, weightless world, the only sound the rhythmic hiss and bubble of his regulator, a metronome for his meditative explorations. He moved with an economy of motion born of long practice, a ghost gliding through an explosion of marine life, his camera an extension of his observant eye. But this deep immersion in solitude, as much as he sought it, carried its own subtle weight. Back on land, in the quiet of his rented cottage, the silence sometimes echoed a little too loudly. Ethan was an introvert by nature, perfectly content with his own company, yet beneath the surface, unacknowledged most days, lay a vein of loneliness. It wasn't a crippling sadness, more like a dull ache, a persistent whisper of something missing. He'd once been married a long time ago, a life that felt like it belonged to someone else now. The ocean, in its immense, impartial grandeur, seemed to understand this quiet ache, offering both a reflection of his solitude and a soothing balm for it. One Tuesday, the kind of day the Keys are famous for, the sky a boundless, impossible blue, the water a shimmering turquoise invitation, Ethan decided to explore a site a little further offshore. Captain Joe had mentioned it, Devil's Backbone, a more challenging reef system known for its dramatic drop-offs and relatively untouched coral, but also for its unpredictable currents. Ethan was meticulous. He ran through his pre-dive checklist with practiced precision. BCD inflated, deflated, smooth. Regulator breathing easy. Dive computer synced and active. His high-definition camera, a trusty GoPro Hero 10, mounted securely on its tray. He gave Captain Joe the OK sign, adjusted his mask, and with a practice back roll, plunged into the warm embrace of the Gulf Stream. The world above vanished, replaced by a sun-dappled, cerulean kingdom. The familiar, comforting silence pressed in. Sunlight fractured into dancing beams, illuminating the vibrant coral heads that rose like elaborate, submerged castles. He glided past immense brain corals, their surfaces grooved like giant cerebral hemispheres, and delicate sea fans waving gently in the subtle surge. A majestic loggerhead turtle, ancient and unperturbed, paddled by, giving him a cursory glance from wise, reptilian eyes. Ethan was in his element, camera rolling, utterly absorbed in the spectacle. He was tracking a school of vibrant blue tangs as they swarmed over a patch of elkhorn coral, their collective movement a living, breathing tapestry of color. When he first sensed it, a subtle change in the water's flow, an almost imperceptible pressure against his body. He initially dismissed it. Currents were the ocean's pulse, a constant in this fluid world. But this was different. The gentle sway rapidly intensified into a determined, irresistible tug. He was caught. An unexpected, ferocious rip current, an invisible, powerful river within the sea, had materialized out of nowhere and seized him in its unyielding grasp. Ethan, for all his experience, felt a cold knot of apprehension tighten in his stomach. He knew the protocol: don't fight it head-on, swim perpendicular to its flow. But this current was a savage beast, disorienting and overwhelmingly strong. He angled his body, kicking with all his might, fins biting into the water, but it was like trying to swim up a waterfall. The breathtaking coral formations blurred, then receded, swallowed by the hazy blue distance. Panic, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, began to infiltrate his professional composure. He glanced at his dive computer. Depth still manageable, but his air consumption, dear God, his air was plummeting. The exertion was immense, his heart thudding like a trapped bird against his ribs, the sound of his own ragged, desperate breathing unnaturally loud in his ears. But it was like trying to swim up a waterfall. His muscles screamed in protest, lactic acid burning through his thighs and calves. He was losing the battle. The current was an indomitable force, dragging him further and further from the reef, further from the salty dog, further from safety. He was being swept out into the open ocean, a helpless speck tossed about by forces far beyond his control. The familiar underwater landmarks were gone, replaced by a deeper, more featureless expanse, plummeting. The sunlight, once so vibrant, was now a muted, distant glow filtering down from an increasingly remote surface. His dive computer's compass still functioned, but the readings were useless. He had no bearings, no point of reference in this alien seascape. He fumbled for his emergency signaling device, a compact acoustic pinger designed to alert surface vessels, and activated it, but a wave of despair washed over him as he realized the futility. He was likely already far beyond its limited range. Silence answered, save for the increasingly desperate hiss of his dwindling air supply. Fear, raw and primal, now held him in its icy grip. Despair, a heavy, suffocating blanket, began to settle in. This was it. This was how it ended. His pressure gauge needle quivered precariously in the red zone. Lost, alone, oxygen critically low. The insidious effects of nitrogen narcosis, exacerbated by extreme stress and oxygen deprivation, began to warp his perception. Phantoms flickered at the edge of his vision, distorted faces from his past, half-formed memories. The ghostly outline of a city skyline he vaguely recognized as Boston, where he'd once worked a soul-crushing corporate job he'd fled years ago. Ironically, he'd sought the ocean's solitude to escape the pressures of that life, and now that very solitude was threatening to become his tomb. He even hallucinated the faint, mournful sound of a foghorn, a sound so intrinsically linked to his main home. Just as a profound, crushing weariness began to overwhelm him, as the will to fight started to ebb away, a dark, streamlined silhouette emerged from the deep, hazy blue ahead. It was large, moving with a confident, fluid power that stood in stark contrast to his own failing struggles. Ethan's heart gave a painful lurch, a fresh surge of adrenaline momentarily cutting through the fog of hypoxia. Shark? His mind, already frayed, conjured images of sleek, gray hunters. A great white? A bull shark? The possibilities were terrifying, but as the shape resolved itself, drawing nearer in the dim, filtered light, he realized it wasn't a harbinger of death. It was a dolphin, a magnificent Atlantic bottlenose, at least 8, maybe 9 feet in length, its skin the color of polished pewter, its body a perfect hydrodynamic marvel of muscle and grace. It circled him slowly, once then twice, its dark, intelligent eye fixed on him with an unnerving, unblinking focus. It emitted a series of rapid, high-frequency clicks and whistles, its natural sonar bouncing off Ethan, probing, analyzing. It was, he thought, with a detached part of his brain, scanning him, assessing his condition with an almost clinical precision. Ethan, despite the icy grip of fear, felt a spark of something else ignite within him. Awe. He'd seen dolphins countless times from the deck of a boat, their joyful acrobatics a familiar sight in these waters. But this was different. This was an encounter in their domain, on their terms, and he was utterly, terrifyingly vulnerable. He instinctively froze, trying to make himself appear as small and non-threatening as possible. A ludicrous notion given his bulky dive gear and his desperate predicament. The dolphin completed its circuit, and then, to Ethan's utter astonishment, it did something that defied all his understanding of wild animal behavior. It swam directly towards him, not with aggression, but with a strange, deliberate calm. With an almost imperceptible gentleness for a creature of such power, it nudged his neoprene-clad arm with its rostrum, its smooth, beak-like snout. The touch was soft, yet firm, undeniably intentional. Then it turned, swam a short distance ahead, paused, and looked back, its head cocked slightly, its eyes still fixed on him. The gesture was unmistakable. Follow me. Hope, a fragile, scarcely believable tendril of hope unfurled in Ethan's chest. What other choice did he have? His air was practically gone, his strength completely depleted. He was adrift, lost, facing certain death. With a monumental effort of will, fueled by this unexpected, almost mythical intervention, he managed a few weak kicks, trying to propel his unresponsive body forward. The dolphin seemed to understand his limitations. It slowed its pace, adjusting to his feeble attempts, never getting too far ahead. And so began the most extraordinary, the most surreal journey of Ethan Miller's life. A silent, desperate odyssey through an alien underwater world, guided by a wild, sentient being. There were no words exchanged, no shared language, only the crushing desperation of one and the inexplicable, compassionate guidance of the other. The dolphin was his navigator, his guardian angel in cetacean form. It led him with an unerring, almost preternatural sense of direction, its movements a symphony of fluid power and grace. It guided him through dense, disorienting patches of sargassum weed that rose from the depths like an amber-colored, submerged forest, areas where Ethan, in his weakened state, would undoubtedly have become hopelessly entangled. It steered him with subtle shifts of its body around a shadowy, jagged outcrop of rock that loomed suddenly from the gloom, a potential hazard he hadn't even seen. Once a large, menacing barracuda, its silver flanks gleaming, its underslung jaw bristling with needle-sharp teeth, materialized from the hazy periphery, eyeing Ethan with predatory interest. Before Ethan could even process the new threat, the dolphin let out a sharp, percussive burst of clicks and whistles, a sound that seemed to carry an undeniable authority. The barracuda, after a moment of tense hesitation, flickered its tail and vanished back into the blue. Several times, Ethan's vision tunneled, graying out at the edges as hypoxia tightened its grip. His kicks became pathetically weak, his movements uncoordinated and sluggish. He was so cold, a deep, penetrating chill that settled into his bones despite the tropical waters. Each time he faltered, each time despair threatened to pull him under for good, the dolphin would sense it. It would circle back, nudging him gently with its rostrum or its flank, sometimes positioning its strong, smooth body beneath him, providing a subtle upward lift, a buoyant encouragement to keep going. He could feel the incredible power rippling through its muscles when it touched him, the surprising warmth of its skin against his chilled arm. There was an almost telepathic quality to their interaction. He would look into that dark, intelligent eye and find not just curiosity, but something that felt undeniably like empathy. It was a thought that defied logic, but in the delirium of his extreme situation, it felt profoundly, undeniably true. He fixed his gaze on the rhythmic, powerful sweep of the dolphin's tail flukes, the way its perfectly streamlined body sliced through the water with such effortless efficiency. It became his focal point, his metronome, his sole beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. The world narrowed to this single, desperate imperative: follow the dolphin. His dive computer was now a cacophony of silent, flashing warnings, its display a stark red testament to his critical state. He knew he was living on borrowed time, perhaps already beyond it, functioning on sheer adrenaline and the inexplicable will of his rescuer. Then, a subtle but definite change began to register in his oxygen-starved brain. A shift in the ambient light. He forced his eyes to focus upwards, or what he perceived as upwards. The water seemed less opaque, distinctly lighter, the pervasive blue tinged with a hint of brighter turquoise. Was that sunlight? A stronger, clearer, more defined sunlight than the muted glow he'd been immersed in for what felt like an eternity? The dolphin seemed to sense the change too, or perhaps it was leading him towards it. It increased its pace slightly, and Ethan, drawing upon some primal, hidden reserve of energy he didn't know he possessed, somehow managed to match it. The seabed, which had been a distant, indistinct blur, began to slope perceptibly upwards. He could make out sand ripples now, then small, hopeful patches of seagrass. The depth reading on his dive computer, which he could barely decipher through his fog mask and wavering vision, was decreasing. 30 feet, 25, 15. With a final, powerful surge of its tail, the dolphin angled sharply towards the surface. Ethan followed, his lungs burning, his body an aching, leaden weight, every muscle screaming in protest. And then, with an explosive burst, his head broke the surface. He gasped, coughed violently, sputtering salt water, and then drew in a huge, ragged, shuddering breath of air. Sweet, cool, life-giving air. The sunlight was dazzling, almost blinding after the dim twilight of the depths. He blinked repeatedly, trying to clear his vision, his eyes streaming. And then he saw it. Land. Not just an abstract concept, but tangible land. A familiar stretch of white sandy beach, fringed with swaying palm trees, the distant, reassuring outline of a fishing pier he recognized from his navigational charts. He was back. He was impossibly, miraculously alive. Tears, hot and stinging, welled in his eyes, mingling with the salt water already coursing down his face. He was overcome by a tidal wave of emotion so intense it left him weak and trembling. Overwhelming relief, profound disbelief, and immeasurable, humbling gratitude, all crashing over him in a single, shattering moment. He was treading water, barely, his limbs heavy and unresponsive, utterly spent but gloriously, unbelievably alive. The dolphin was still there, right beside him, its sleek head breaking the surface. It circled him once more in the brighter, sunlit surface water, its prominent dorsal fin cutting cleanly through the gentle waves. It swam close, so close he could feel the warmth of its body, and this time it pressed its side firmly against his arm, a lingering, deliberate, almost affectionate touch. It looked at him, its head tilted slightly, its dark eye holding his gaze, and Ethan, in that moment, felt a connection so profound, so pure, it transcended any human interaction he had ever known. He wanted to reach out, to touch it, to somehow convey the immensity of his gratitude. But his arm was too heavy, his fingers numb. He could only look, his heart overflowing with an emotion for which there were no words. As if understanding his unspoken thanks, the dolphin emitted a soft, chuffing sound, a gentle puff of air from its blowhole. It lingered for another moment, its intelligent eye holding his. Then, with a powerful, graceful flick of its tail, it dipped its head, its sleek back arched, and it dove. It swam a short distance, its form a dark shadow beneath the turquoise surface, then breached briefly, its body arcing through the air in a final, joyful leap, as if in farewell. And then, with a last, perfect plunge, it was gone, disappearing into the vast, indifferent blue from whence it had come, leaving only a widening circle of ripples on the sun-dazzled water. Ethan watched until the last ripple had faded, until there was nothing but the endless expanse of the ocean and the sky. He didn't know how long he floated there, suspended between shock and euphoria, a man reborn. Eventually, the distant thrum of a boat engine grew louder, resolving into the familiar lines of the salty dog. It was Captain Joe, his weathered face a mask of stark terror that slowly morphed into incredulous relief as he spotted Ethan. Joe had been searching frantically, calling the Coast Guard, his mind racing through worst-case scenarios after Ethan had failed to surface at the designated time and his emergency pinger had remained stubbornly silent. Likely because Ethan had been dragged far beyond its effective range and into a dead zone for radio signals. Joe hauled him aboard with surprising strength, babbling with a mixture of relief, concern, and 1,000 unasked questions. Ethan, hypothermic, exhausted to his core, and still reeling from the sheer improbability of his survival, could only offer weak, fragmented explanations, his voice hoarse. He was alive, and for now, that was all that mattered. Later, wrapped in thick, warm blankets back at the marina, sipping a mug of scalding hot, sweet coffee that Captain Joe had pressed into his shaking hands, Ethan stared out at the now placid expanse of the Atlantic. It was the same ocean he had always loved for its untamed beauty, for its profound, restorative solitude. But it felt different now. It held a new layer of mystery, a new depth of meaning. He had ventured into its embrace, seeking solace and escape, and had found himself facing its terrifying indifference, only to be rescued by an act of interspecies compassion that defied all rational explanation. Ethan Miller never saw that specific dolphin again, though for years afterwards, on every subsequent, far more cautious dive, he found himself scanning the horizon, a silent, hopeful question in his heart. The experience didn't scare him away from the ocean. If anything, it deepened his respect for it, his connection to it. But it changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. The quiet corners of his life, the ones he'd so carefully cultivated, didn't feel quite so empty anymore. He was still Ethan Miller, a man who cherished his solitude, but the persistent undercurrent of loneliness that had shadowed him for so long had significantly lessened, replaced by a profound, almost spiritual sense of connection, not just to the wild, unpredictable, and sometimes miraculously benevolent ocean, but to life itself. He carried the memory of that gentle, guiding nudge, that intelligent, unwavering eye, that silent, life-saving journey through the deep, not as a trauma to be overcome, but as a sacred, precious gift. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep within his bones, that he had been touched by something truly extraordinary, a moment of pure, unadulterated grace from the very heart of the wild. And that, he eventually realized, was a story that needed to be shared, a testament to the enduring wonders that still lie hidden in the depths, and sometimes in the unexpected kindness of strangers, no matter their form.